It is first and foremost my pleasure and privilege. This is an amazing schus to be Marbitz Torah in this way, at this scope, in such difficult times. So this is my third shir today, and I have another one later tonight. But Baruch Hashem, this is a very special shir because I've been with the Archikal of the Aguda for a few months now. I stopped counting long ago. And we went through some of the most fundamental sugyas and mitzvahs in Seder Hayoim Shel Odom Yisrael. The various different brachas, Berachas HaTorah, and Berachas HaMazon, and Berachas HaMitzvah, and Berachas HaNahan, and those are the fundamentals of Avodas HaOdom B'Olamai. And now we're starting Hilchos Shabbos. And Hilchos Shabbos, once again, Shabbos is one of the most fundamental yesodis in Yiddishkeit. It goes without saying. So the topic we will be discussing today is Malachas Machshavas. And as Reb Shlomo mentioned, I said a sheet about the sugya many years ago in Lakewood. I don't recall exactly when that was. There were thousands of Yungalite and Bochum there. And even today, sometimes many people stop me in Boteknesias and Midrashas on the streets, and they say, we heard that shir in Lakewood, and obviously it made somewhat of an impression. I first wrote about the sugya Minchas Osha Masechet Shabbos that was published Tofshin Nun Daled. That's quite a while ago, 27 years ago. So that was the first time I printed anything on the sugya of Malachas Machshavas. And then there were 19 different sources that I touched upon. And 19 is quite a significant number when you're giving a shir on a certain sugya. But as you can imagine, since Tafshin Nun Daled, I went through Bavli and Yerushalmi quite a few times. And the latest version of this shir is 27 sources and not 19. I will not burden you with all the sources. But my son-in-law did send Rabbi Gottesman the latest version, and if anyone wants to learn the sugya in greater depth and in greater breadth, you could get the latest version that my son-in-law sent to Rabbi Gottesman, and I'm sure he will be happy to supply it, because I think listening to the shir is more enriching, and it'll give you a greater appreciation of the Yesodis than just learning it in the Sefer. But going through what I wrote about this will give you more breadth and more sugyas, because I cannot possibly speak about 27 different sugyas in the short shir that we have tonight. And therefore, I will just have to hope. Ten lechochem v'yachkim oid. We'll just give you the aside and a fundamental taste about the beauty of the sugya, and you could always add on. So the most fundamental principle in Malachas Shabbos is Malachas Machshavas. Everything depends on Malachas Machshavas. Some people think that this Hagdorah Malachas Machshavas in the Torah is in the context of Shabbos, and it is not. It's not in the context of Malachas Shabbos, but rather Malachas HaMishkan. And the posuk is in Parshas V'Yakel. So in Parshas V'Yakel, we find the posuk L'kol Malachas Machshavas, and the question is, how do we define Malachas Machshavas? Because in many sugyas in Shas, we find the fundamental idea is that whatever fits into the category of Malachas Machshavas would be a Malacha D'Oraisa. Whatever cannot be defined as Malachas Machshavas will not be a Malacha D'Oraisa. And therefore, it is so important to define, so what is Malachas Machshavas? So before I want to teach you my Yesod and give many examples to substantiate this Yesod, I just want to make a general comment with Darkei Talmud. Every concept must have one Hagdorah. Mi'amois gedoyle harashoyna, mad achroyne u achroynem. Gedoyle yisur oisik in Hagdoras. in the definition of any halacha, in the definition of every concept, every mitzvah, whether it's a mitzvah say or a mitzvah say. And anybody that listens to my shiurim on a steady basis knows that we are oisek a great deal in haggadoros, because if you have the right haggadah, then you understand what the halachas are and what comes out of this haggadah. So we could only suggest one haggadah to a concept, but a concept may have many characteristics. I don't know how to say characteristics in Yiddish. In Lashon Kodesh, it is ma'afyenim. So a concept may have many characteristics, but it must have one fundamental haggadah, one fundamental definition. So what is the definition of Malachas Machshavas? So let me first make a short introduction. B'divrei haGemora v'harashonim, Chazal make use of Malachas Machshavas in three different areas. So the Posek in Parshas V'Yakov speaks about Bitzalel and Oholiav and Chachmei Lev that performed all the Malachas HaMishkan, L'chol Malachas Machshavas. What does it have to do with Shabbos? Iskish Malachas Shabbos LaMalachas HaMishkan. We know. How do we know which are the 39 malachas? Obas malachas aboam chosarachas. That's the Mishnah Shabbos defying Gimel. How do we know which are the malachas that are prohibited on Shabbos? It is not aloha la Moshe Messinai. We do not find a list in Torah's Moshe or in Nevi'im Ksuvim. So Chazal teaches us in Shabbos Memtes all the malachas that were essential and necessary by Komas HaMishkan. Those are Malachas Shabbos. And we learn that from a Hekesh. Iskishu Malachas Shabbos LaMalachas HaMishkan. And therefore the concept of Malachas Machshavas, which we find by Malachas HaMishkan, also defines Lametas Malachas Shabbos. So what we learn from the Mishkan is not only which are the Lametas Malachas, but also the very fundamental concept of Malachas Shabbos. Just like the Malachas Shenasu b'Mishkan were Malachas Machshavas, Lametas Malachas Shabbos are not defined as Malachas only if they are Malachas Machshavas. And Chazal use this concept in three different ways. First of all, to define what can be considered a malacha and what not. So when Chazal need to decide which are Lametas Malachas Shabbos. So on one hand, we learn from the Mishkan, but there were many other things that were done in the Mishkan which are not in the list of Lametas Malachas. Besides the Lametas Malachas, that were all necessary by Komas HaMishkan, many other things were done by Komas HaMishkan, and they're not in the list. And why not? Because they're not Malachas Machshavas. This is found in Beit Sedav Yud Gimel. But in my Ksovim, in my Sefer, I brought additional sources. Look it up, check it out, with Yedidi Reb Shlomo. Beit Yud Gimel is the very first time in Shas we find the two words Malachas Machshavas, which is an interesting phenomenon. In the entirety of Masechet Shabbos, Daf Kuf Nun Zayin, 156 pages Malachas Shabbos. Malachas Eruvin, which fundamentally deals with Hilchos Shabbos. Masechet Psochim. First time in Shas we find the term Malachas Machshavas is in Beit Sedav Yud Gimel. What's the context? The Gemara asks why is Hamodas Areima, which is putting a bundle of Tvuah together. Why is it defined Mar Malacha Lagabe Tumas HaMa'asos and it's not defined as a Malacha regarding Shabbos? And the Gemara says, it's not Malachas Machshavas. So, and obviously in the Mishkan, just like they needed to be Zereya and Koitze, the Samamonim, probably they brought together from the fields, the Hamidu Arema, but it's not defined as a malacha. Even though it is considered Gemara Malacha Lagabe Maislis, it's not defined as a malacha Shabbos. Why? It's not malachas Shabbos. So what we learn from this Gemara is when Chazal need to decide exactly which of the malachas performed by Komas HaMishkan would make it into the list of Lamates malachas and which would not, the key to that decision was malachas Shabbos. In Sifri, Chazal ask, why is Knivas Yerek and Shtifas Kalem not defined as malachas and Shabbos? Washing dishes. Knivas Yerek. So if you cut a Yerek to very small pieces, it's Toichen. But obviously in the Mishkan they cut some ammonim. Why ain't these considered malachas machshavos? Why ain't these considered malachas and Shabbos? Because they're not malachas machshavos. So these are the two sources in which we find that malachas machshavos determines which of the various acts performed by Komas HaMishkan are considered malachas Shabbos. I just want to mention the Gemara in Bava Kama Beis Amud Aleph. Hach tahave b'mishkan chashiva korele yavois. Two perushim in the Rishonim. What do Chazal mean? Hach tahave b'mishkan chashiva. One perush is, it is only the chashiva malachas that were performed in the Mishkan that are considered malachas Shabbos. Not everything. So that pshat in Bava Kama Beis Amud Aleph fits in perfectly with the Gemara Beitzi Yud Gimel Amud Beis. The second area in which Chazal deal with the concept of malachas machshavos is in 14 different sugyas. 14 different sugyas. And the common denominator, the tzad ha-shoveh shebeheim, is that if a malach is performed in a certain fashion, which would not be defined as malachas machshavos, can it be an issa d'oraisa? And I will go through part of that list, not all the 14, but we will give 5, 6, 7 examples just to have you achieve clarity in this sugya. And the tzad ha-shoveh between all these makoros is the deficiency of what cannot be defined as malachas machshavos. Because malachas machshavos not only determines which are the malachas machshavos also determines the way in which one performs a malacha. Is it malachas machshavos or not? And if it's not malachas machshavos, there could be no issa d'oraisa. Third category is, in most sugyas, I've mentioned 14, malachas machshavos is a ptur, but in some sugyas, malachas machshavos is a chiyuv. If not for the concept of malachas machshavos, we would say he's potur. It's not the way you do a malacha. It's not defined as a siyas malacha. But because it is malachas machshavos, he would be chayiv. So usually malachas machshavos determines, if it would be any other avein in the Torah, it would be chayiv, but Shabbos is potter because it's not malachas machshavos. But sometimes we say the opposite. If it would be any other issa in the Torah, it would be potter. But the Shabbos is chayiv because it is malachas machshavos. So before I give you the key and the definition, let's embark on our short journey. And I want to start sharing with you various different sources. Dover she'ein mischaven. And I'm sure you're going to deal a great lot with Dover she'ein mischaven. One of the most important yesodis, not only in Hilchos Shabbos, but in all the Avedas Shabbat. So it's a machlokes of Yehuda and Reb Shimon. Reb Yehuda is chayiv, and Reb Shimon says potu. But Tosfos in various different sources in Shabbos. In Shas, Shabbos Mamalafum with Beis Yom Alamadalad with Beis, Tosfos says, by Shabbos, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree it cannot be an Issa D'Oraisa. Regarding Kol HaTorah Kula, the Hashem is Chaven, according to Rabbi Yehuda is Chayev, according to Rabbi Shimon, Mutar. But by Shabbos, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree, cannot be an Issa D'Oraisa because it's not Malachas Mosheves. Malachas she'ein tzricha legufo. Shabbos daf ayin hey omed aleph. Tosfos says, why is it potter? Once again, it's not Malachas Mosheves. So just in a nutshell, the kids and imers, what's the difference between Davar Shemes Chaven and Malachas she'ein tzricha legufo? Davar Shemes Chaven, a person is aware he's doing the malacha, but he has no interest in that malacha. He gets no benefit out of the malacha. The classical example is Goyrel Odom Kisei Mite V'Stavso, dragging a bench in the sand and the mud and the dirt. So obviously he wasn't born yesterday. He knows that probably it's going to make an impression, but he has no need for that impression it'll make in the dirt. So that's a little Shemes Chaven. He's aware he's doing a malacha, but he has no interest and no benefit out of that malacha. What's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufo? He does derive benefit from the malacha, but the benefit is not from the ikar malacha. It's an indirect benefit. When you dig a ditch or a pit, the malacha is the ditch, the pit, but he doesn't really want to use that pit or that hole in the ground. He just needs earth. So he is deriving benefit, but it's not benefit from the etzem hamalacha. It's a side benefit of an indirect result of the malacha. That's malacha she'ein tzricha legufo. And then we have the concept of misasek. And misasek is not only a Tosfos, it's a Gemara meforeshes, Sanhedrin Samach Beis Umid Beis, and Krisis Yutes Umid Beis. What's a misasek? Nischaven lagabia es a tolush, v'chotach es a mechubar. So a misasek derives benefit from the malacha, but he's not aware that he's doing the malacha. So I'm giving you very clear hagdoras. Misasek has interest. He lacks awareness. Davar Shemes Chaven has awareness, but he has no interest, no benefit. Malachas she'ein tzricha legufo is somewhere in the middle. He has awareness, he has a benefit, but it is not benefit from the etzem ikar hamalacha, but it is the side result. And all these three are potter because it's not malachas machshavos. If we would stop right here, the most reasonable hagdora for malachas machshavos would be maloshen machshava. Because the tzad hashova between Davar Shemes Chaven, malachas she'ein tzricha legufo, and misasek, in all three, there is a deficiency in his kavana. But we don't stop here, and we move on. Mekalkel b'Shabbos is potur. Why? Gemara meforeshes Chagigi Yud Amud Beis. Because it's not malachas machshavos. By Mekalkel, there's no deficiency in kavana. He knows what he wants, and he is going to achieve exactly the result he wants. And he is aware. He does want to derive benefit. And why is he potter? Because it's not malachas machshavos. Kil achar yad potter b'Shabbos. And this is fascinating phenomena. Nowhere in Shas do we find why kil achar yad potter b'Shabbos. I don't even remember whether any of the Rishonim in Masechet Shabbos explain why kil achar yad is potter b'Shabbos. Divrei Torah aniyim b'mukom echod va'ashirim b'mukom achad. You need to learn Even HaEzer sometimes to understand halacha in Hilchos Shabbos. Even HaEzer Kuf Chav Gimel. There's a discussion whether you could write a get b'yad small. Both the Beis Shmuel and the Chelkas Mechoykik ask regarding Shabbos, koise b'small potu. So why is a get that was written b'yad small a kosher get? So both the Chelkas Mechoykik and the Beis Shmuel, Roshei HaMedabrim be'Even HaEzer, both explain Kalacha Yad b'Shabbos is unique only to Hilchos Shabbos because it's not Malachas Machshavas. Has nothing to do with Ksivas Aget. So yes, the Posuk says because of La Seifa Krisis. So regarding Ksivas Aget, Ksiva B'Smol is definitely considered Ksiva. Shabbos is different, not Malachas Machshavas. So before going on, let us stop right here and ask, so what is Malachas Machshavas? Kalacha Yad and Mekalkal have nothing to do with Machshava. There is no deficiency at all in the person's intention or in the way he achieves his goal. The deficiency is only ba'oifen asiyas ha'malacha. So the basic definition of Malachas Machshavas is an onkelos. Onkelos and Rashi were the two greatest meforshim of Torah's Moshe. Without Targum, onkelos and Rashi, lo imotzonu yodeinu v'ragleinu. Between the two, 1,500 years transpired. But onkelos and Rashi are the kings. And they are the most important meforshim to understand Torah's Hashem Temima. Targum onkelos in Parshas V'Yakel, Malachas Machshavas Ividas Navan. Rashi Beitz Yud Gimel Amud Beis, Malachas Machshavas, Malachas Umnis. Loosely translated, Malachas Machshavas is the work of a craftsman, the work of a mumche. So the work of a mumche, of a craftsman, has many characteristics, but the Hagdorah is one. Malachas Machshavas is not Maloshen Machshava, but rather Maloshen Chashivus. And Malachas Machshavas is the work of a craftsman. Because Betzalel and Oholiav, Kodesh Baruch Hu nosen bilibom chochmas leiv, and they did whatever they did b'komas Mishkan in the most proper, efficient, beautiful manner. And that is why so many different halachas are all associated with Malachas Machshavas. Either it is Malachas Machshavas or it's not Malachas Machshavas. If it's not, no Chiyuv and Shabbos. If it is, Chiyuv and Shabbos. And therefore, Malachas Machshavas is so fundamental. So when Chazal need to decide which malachas that were performed and were necessary by Komas Mishkan would be considered a malacha, not all of them, as we learn in Beitzah, as we learn Shtifas Kelim, Hatzoas Amito, Knivas Yerek, are not defined as a malacha because they're not characterized as malachas umnis. So when a umin does a malacha, he knows exactly what he wants to do. And he's aware of what he's doing. And he achieves his goal exactly in the fashion that he planned. And therefore, malachas is a duv Hashem ischaven. He had no attention. That's not malachas umnis. If he wasn't aware that he's doing a malacha, that's not malachas umnis. And then there's another concept I didn't even mention before, and that is nases machshavtoi. And that's a sug in Shabbos Tzadik Zayin Amid Beis. Nischaven Lizroik B'tzad Zeh, V'holach B'tzad Achar, Poto B'Shabbos. He threw Daradamas B'Shus HaRabim. But he wanted to throw right, and the ball went left. The pitcher knows where he throws, and the ball gets exactly where he wants it to go. And therefore, the Gemara says, that's not the way a craftsman would throw. So he had intention. But the result was not exactly the way he planned it. That, once again, is not malachas Mashevas. When a craftsman does malacha, he does a good job. So if you call the person to fix your fridge or your air conditioner, and he broke it more than it was before, obviously, you're not going to pay him. That's not a mumche. That's not what you expect of a professional. So mekalkel, there's no deficiency in his kavona, but that is not malachas Mashevas. And when a craftsman does a malacha, he does it in the best fashion, not kalacha yad, not in a strange way. So whatever cannot be defined as evidas nevan, as malachas umnes, would not be considered malachas Mashevas, and therefore there could be no chiyuv on Shabbos. And there are many additional halachas, all based on this same idea. So let me share with you an interesting story and a psak of the Chidush HaRim. The Chidush HaRim was the gewaltige HaRav. Minhag Poilin was that people used to carry on the Ketanim. And Ketanim used to take their talesim to shul. They used to bring the chont to shul for the kiddush. Two great gedolim going back more than 200 years reject this minhag. Rebbe Kiva Eger and the Mishkenes Yankov. Shalas Teshuvas Chidush HaRim Siman Gimel. He has a spark of genius to be miyashiv minhag poilin. And he says, yes, Kotten Oisal Das Oviv is an Issa Diurais. It's not merely an Issa Derabona. It's not only a question of chinuch. You're not allowed to have a cotton do a Maloch al Das Oviv. But the Chidush HaRim argues that is only if the only reason it's not a Diurais, it's just because he's a cotton and he's not a bar chiyuv. But if that malacha is not malachas machsheves, then there would not be no isur. So Chidush HaRim argues based on the Gemara Shabbos Daf Hey. Oyo mefanach hafeitzim mizovis lezovis venimlach alayim lo hitzion potur lo yoisol dato mishorosh shoino lekach. So as you know, by malachas eitzah, you need akira v'hanocha. You need to pick up the chayfetz in one rishus and put it down in the other rishus. Whether you're moitze mishus hayochad l'shus harabim or you're machnes mishus harabim l'shus hayochad, you need akira and hanocha. So the Gemara says if a person lifted an object in l'shus hayochad, but when he lifted that object, he didn't plan to take it out to b'shus harabim, but rather put it down somewhere else in his house, in his private domain. And then he decided to take it out to Shus HaRabim, he's not chayiv. Lo yehoisu machshavtoi marshorosh eino lokach. So the Gemara says, it's actually a Mishnah in Kalim, but it's also got Mechul Daf Yud Beis. Cotton leslie machshava. Only a machshavtoi nekeres metorich masav. So the Chidush HaRim argues, when a cotton picks something up in one rishus and takes it out to Rishus HaRabim, that's not malachas machsheves because cotton ain't lo machshav. And maybe when he picked up the object, he didn't plan to take it out to Rishus HaRabim, but rather put it down somewhere else in the house. You'd pick up a sitter at home, you would put it somewhere else, or a talis, or a chont, or whatever it is. So because the Gemara says on Chulin Yod Beis Kot Neila Machshava would not be defined as Malachas Machshavas, and if it's not Malachas Machshavas, there would be no Isra al Yedei Ketanim. It's a gewaldige chiddush. I don't want to go in at length, but just tell you a fascinating story. There's a very famous picture of the Imre Emes walking with an entourage. The Beis Yisrael, his great son, who was the Ger Rebbe after the Imre Emes passed away, he's standing at his left. And the Pnei Menachem, as a child, is walking right next to his great father, the Imre Emes, and he's holding the Rebbe's Spodek in his hand. And that L'choire proves that even up to the days of the Imre Emes, Minhag Poilan was still Mekuyim. So obviously it's Shabbos, because the Imre Emes is wearing his Spodek, and he's not carrying the Spodek, but rather his son, who was a child, is carrying the Spodek. That proves that the Imre Emes relied on the psak of the Chidush She'arim against the Bekiveng and the Mishkenes Yankiv. For many years, I said, no, it's not a raya at all. We could prove nothing from this picture. Because the Beis Yisrael standing next to the Imre Emes is wearing a hat and not a spodek. So it couldn't be on Shabbos. So probably they were going to a bris or a sheva bruchas or a family simcha. And that's why the Imre Emes wore a spodek. So it's no problem that his little son, the Pnei Menachem, the Pinchas Menachem, carried that spodek. If it would be Shabbos, then the Beis Yisrael would wear a spodek. Many years ago, I said this shir in Antwerp. After the shir, a young man approached me and told me his grandfather was present when that picture was taken. And it was Shabbos. And his grandfather remembers it was a non-Jewish photographer that took that picture. And Sunday morning, all the Hasidim were on top of him. They came to his shop and they bought that picture. So it was Shabbos. You know, I needed to hear this from Clay Rishon, so I went to visit his grandfather because I wanted to be sure that I hear this with my ears. And his grandfather, an altogether chassid, he no longer is with us. And he told me, yes, he remembers it was Shabbos. So why was the Beis Yisrael wearing a hat? So he told me something fascinating. This picture was taken in Marienbad. Marienbad was a resort, and the Imre Emes was makbid that the Hasidim in Marienbad should not wear spodeks. It wasn't a ger, it was a resort. And Gedolim, and many people used to go to rest. They used to go for vacation to Marienbad, to Carlsbad. And the Imre Emes was makbid, you know, not to be too obvious, not to have such a high profile. And that is why the Pinchas Menachem is carrying his spodek, because he was makbid that people should, Hasidim should not go and set up with their spodeks. So yes, this picture does prove that the Imre Emes followed the ruling, the Chiddush of the Chidush She'arim to be Miyashev Minhag Poilan. However, I know that the basis on Yerushalayim was makbid that Ketanim should not carry. So going back to the concept of Malachas Machshavas, Ividas Umnevan, Malachas Umnis, the work of a craftsman, and therefore there are so many different halachas, which l'chayr are not the same, but they all boil down to the same question. Is this the proper way a mumche, a professional, a craftsman would do a malacha? And this brings me to concept number 3. We know that Grome b'Shabbos is not an Issa d'Oraisa. That's a Gemara for Shabbos Kuf Chof Amud Beis. Lo yisasu kol malacha ksiv asiya asra Torah hu Grome Sharia. Grome would not be an Issa. But then there's another sugya in Bava Kama Samach Omed Aleph. Libo v'lib seruach. If a person stoked a fire, but the fire wouldn't spread, only because there was a wind, and the wind made the fire spread. Benizokin is potter, because it's grome benezikin and grome benezikin potter. So the Gemara asks, Zoyre v'ruach Messiah, so in Shabbos is chayiv. So what's the difference between Nizikin and Shabbos? If you stoke a fire, but the fire wouldn't spread without the wind, then you bear no responsibility. That's a grama ben Nizikin. So when you perform a malacha, which is zaira, in English I think it's winnowing, and the way this malacha was performed in days of yore is, there was a taroivis of psoilis and oichel after the disha, after the wheat was crushed by the feet of animals, and then you threw it in the air, and the wind blew away the psoilis, because that was far lighter than the kernels of grain, which were heavier, and they fall down. And that was a way to be boirer oichel metoich psoilis. So why is zoyre chayiv? You're taking advantage of the wind. Why would it be different than a zikin? Rav Ashi says, Shani Shabbos, the malachas machshavas asur Torah. And Rashi writes, malachas machshavas asur Torah v'harei naseis machshavto. And therefore, there would be a chiyuv. So this is an example in which malachas machshavas is not a ptur, but to the contrary, it's a chiyuv. By nazikin is potok. Because when you take advantage of a natural force, a natural source of energy, like the wind, you bear no responsibility. It's not your doing. It's only a grama. But in Shabbos, it is malachas machshavas. And to me, this is so appealing. Because who was the very first human being, the very first person to take advantage of a source, to discover a natural source of energy? Who was he? Or the Marishan? Chazal say in Motzei Shabbos, it was dark, it was cold, he took two rocks, banged them together, and he discovered fire. And he put on a fire. So Odom Marishan was the first to discover natural sources of energy. And since man was born, man realized that he's not very powerful. And he always tried to take advantage of natural sources of energy to achieve his goals. And that is malachas machshavas. So regarding Dinei Roitzeach, regarding Dinei Nezikin, he's a grama poto. But it is malachas machshavas. So mills were built on running water, on rivers. Even today, huge power plants take advantage of waterfalls, of the awesome power of running water to turn the turbines and to produce electricity. We have windmills in the entire world. So man is taking advantage, utilizing the wind, solar energy. So that definitely would be defined as malachas machshavas. Because for the same reason that mekalkel is potter and kalachi yad is potter and davashem is chavan is potter, groma would be chayiv if it is malachas machshavas. So maybe at another opportunity, we will delve deeper into the concept of groma b'Shabbos and explain, so what is the difference between Bava Kama Samach Omed Aleph and Shabbos Kuf Chesed and Kuf Chof Omed Beis. But what I just try to explain is, it all depends on malachas machshavas. In 14 sources in Shas, malachas machshavas is a ptur. In 7 sources in Shas and the Rishonim, malachas machshavas is a chiyuv. I just touched upon 7 or 8 of the Pturim and 1 of the Chiyuvim. And then in 2 or 3 different sources, we find that Malachas Machshavas also defines what can be considered a malacha and what cannot be considered a malacha. So the key is these 2 words, Malachas Machshavas. So Malachas Machshavas would be characterized in many different ways. But there must be one definition. And the definition is, in the words of Targum Onkelos, Evidas Umnevan, in the words of Rashi, Malachas Umnis. If it cannot be defined as Malachas Umnis Potul, even though in other halachas in the Torah it might be Chayiv. And if it is defined as Malachas Machshavas Chayiv, even though in other areas of Torah, it would be Potul. So, Hafoichbo v'Hafoichbo dekulabo. So this is the most fundamental yesod in Malachas Shabbos. And many, many sugyas are based on this fundamental yesod and this basic understanding of what is Malachas Machshavas. So I just touched upon the fundamentals. And as I suggested, if any of you wants to go through the sugya with more sources and greater breadth and greater depth, so just ask for the latest version of the Minchas Osha on Malachas Machshavas. So I wrote about this in Minchas Osha Masechet Shabbos. Minchas Osha, Chumash Shemois, Siman Samach Gimel and Parshas Vayakel, but the latest version wasn't printed yet, and it is available to you. So I am rushing shortly.
Can I forward, if you don't mind, 1 or 2 questions which came up?
Yes, yes, please.
There was a request to re-explain Mekalkel. The Rav explained the Chiluk Kedarshim is Chaman and Moshe Tzruch Legufa, but how does Mekalkel exactly fit in? And the Ptur Mekalkel is a separate Ptur, and how does it fit in with Moshe Tzruch Legufa, which the Gemara seems to?
It does not. It does not. It is a separate halacha. It is not Malacha Tzruch Legufa because Mekalkel, as I explained, by Mekalkel there's no deficiency in Kavona. The deficiency is in Oifen Hasiyas HaMalacha. He achieved his goal, and this is exactly what he wanted, but it's not Malachas Umnis, because when a Umin does a Malacha, he is Metaken and not Mekalkel. And therefore, Mekalkel cannot be defined as Malachas Umnis. So, by Kalach Yad, he is a Metaken and not a Mekalkel, but he did the Malacha in a strange fashion. It's not the proper way to do the Malacha. So that, once again, cannot be defined as Malachas Umnis. So the fundamental idea is Malachas Umnis is characterized. It has many characteristics, even though it's one agdara, it's one definition. Mekalkel is not associated either with Rosh Tzruch Legufa or with the B'Shem Eschaven. Neither is it associated with Kalach Yad. You know, I didn't mention it, but the Rashbam in Bava Basar Nun says Pochas V'Kashir is not Malachas Machshavas. So once again, I say Pochas V'Kashir, according to the Rashbam, is not a Choshev Malacha. You know, a craftsman wouldn't mind to be better a mashu. You know, if he does a malacha, he wants to achieve a reasonable result, an outcome. So many different halachas are based on Malachas Machshavas, even though at first glance, they're not the same. How are they associated one with another? They're not associated one with the other. But they all boil down to the question, is this the work of a professional? So that is my response to the question.
Okay, one other question here is just what the Rav discussed, the Machlekes HaPaiskim Ligavi Grama, and as Rav mentioned properly, Grama is a very complicated subject which requires a shir on its own, but just on the highlight the Rav gave us, so we have Machlekes in the between Eben Ezer and the Maggid of Ram. So it seems that the Rav's Havana explained Evan Oizer. What's the sheet of the Cholkim on the Evan Oizer according to Havana?
So if I will be requested to give a separate sheet on Groma, and it is a fascinating and it's so relevant, in this modern world, this question is so relevant. I actually explained in my forum that the Machlokes Magen Avraham and Evan Oizer is the Machlokes between Rosh and Rashi in Bava Kama Daf Samach, in the very first source. So Rashi and the Rosh are the machlokes between Evan Ezer, the Evan Weiss, and the Magen Avraham, and the Chassam Sofer in the Hagos and Shulchan Aruch. So, if I will be requested to give a Shia and Groma, I will further elaborate on.
Okay, the last question we got here was before the Rav goes into a summation. The last question I got here was on the famous picture. So, what was Taka? The Rav mentioned that the Beis Yisrael did not want Malachah done by Ktanim and in Yerushalayim. He didn't want that. What exactly happened there?
Now, the Beis Yisrael, I knew him. The Beis Yisrael was very from. And I think, he said, Minik Poilen wasn't Poilen. In Yerushalayim, we have different minhagim, and he no longer wanted to rely. So I know, a story that he sent with the Pinchas Menachem some nuts to his family. And then before the Pinchas Menachem left his room, he was told that there is no Eruv. So he told them that, leave it here. I don't want you to carry without an Eruv. And even though it was a child that was supposed to take those whatever it was to his family. So I know that the Beis Yisrael in Yerushalayim was makbid not to do malachas. So we have a Mahudidik Erev in Yerushalayim, and he assumed the Beis Yisrael relied on the Erev. But as the story goes, the Erev fell, and there was no Erev that Shabbos, and therefore he was makbid that even a child should not carry in Yerushalayim on Shabbos. So generally, the Beis Yisrael was very from. He was a big machmir in his own personal life. And I think that he felt that Minik Poilen wasn't Poilen, but now in Yerushalayim, we should, accept the Minik of Rav Oilam Kuloi. But,
the question here is there not a heter for the cotton to carry if the cotton is benefiting for this? So maybe the Pnei Menachem was benefiting from carrying the Tata Spadik in some way. Okay, that's just a...
but, I like to tell the story because the story comes from me, and not from anywhere else. And I heard this directly from a person that was present, and it's an interesting story.
Okay.
Thank you. Pleasure. Kol Tov.